Today, we're going to cover all about the Bitcoin ETF, a lot of the misinformation that's going on out there, and we will really get into the news and dig around how different regions are bringing up their own Bitcoin spot ETFs now, like Europe with their announcement today, but I'm going to break that down if that's significant. And a lot of people are expecting the Bitcoin ETF's approval too early, so I'll give you the actual timelines with the real dates that the SEC has to give their decisions. And yeah, I'll also give you kind of my expectation for when the Bitcoin ETFs will actually come out and which ones are actually significant to watch and which ones are just follow-ons from previous rejections. So make sure to stick till the very end because we're also going to cover Bitcoin price analysis, and I'll give you my perspective on current prices, and we'll do Q&A at the very end. So without further ado, let's get back into it. Welcome back to the Virtual Bitcoin channel. If you're new here for the first time, my name is Dennis. I'm a crypto angel investor for the past 5 years. And on this channel, I break down market trends and investment strategy to build wealth in crypto. So just this morning, one of the biggest news, supposedly biggest news came out, and this was with the Europe's first Bitcoin spot ETF approval. So here, Europe's first spot ETF gets listed in Amsterdam. And this was issued by Jacobi Asset Management. I haven't heard of this firm, but I dug into it a bit, and I'll give you kind of why I don't think this is so significant. So first of all, this is actually not a breaking news. This ETF product has already been approved way back in 2021 in October. So here you see Jacobi Asset Management Firm wins approval to launch Bitcoin ETF in, I'm not sure which European country this is. English Crown Island, right? They have announced their approval on this, and they described it as the world's first tier 1 Bitcoin ETF fund. But however, they kept delaying this launch, and the initial launch was going to be 2022. But now this timing is very coincidental because there's a lot more hype around Bitcoin spot ETF and the narrative is very strong again. So they chose to announce now, most likely because they wanted to catch on the hype and they want to get more investors and potentially make their company seem bigger. So I'll read you some kind of quotes here. One key, the firm emphasized as this is an open-ended fund, its Bitcoin ETF will mark a major shift from the traditional exchange-traded notes or ETNs to date, which are the most widely spread structure in Europe for crypto-backed financial instruments. Now, this is actually the most interesting point here because in Europe, ETFs and ETNs are actually very different from the US environment. Most of the hype that is happening right now around the Bitcoin spot ETFs has to do with US markets, Wall Street, and the SEC. Europe, on the other hand, has always been much more lenient in approving Bitcoin exchange-traded products or ETPs. But one key distinction between this new ETF versus the older products is that the ownership structure is different. So here, ETFs are approved by regulators and are overseen by regulated managers. These managers sign off on all activities and report on a regular basis to the regulators. ETNs, however, do not have such a party providing this level of investor protection. So it's really around transparency, audits, investor protection. However, another major part that a lot of this publication around this European ETF is missing is that Bitcoin spot ETFs, the main benefit of them is that they are physically backed by real Bitcoins. So when you buy these Bitcoin ETFs that are coming next year, each one Bitcoin you buy in that product, in that contract, will have one real Bitcoin that's being purchased and put into the storage, cold storage, and treasury of that whoever's operating this fund. And you have real ownership in that. Historically, other products do not have this structure, which means they have to pay extra fees in order to maintain their exposure on the futures markets. You can think of them like someone trading your money for you. So there's a market maker that's trading on a futures exchange for Bitcoin, and they have to manually rebalance their exposure in order to give you that stimulated exposure to Bitcoin's price, but you don't own that real Bitcoin. However, with ETFs, the biggest benefit is that there are physical Bitcoins behind this backing. Now, this European ETF that was just announced this morning, yes, it will have real Bitcoin physical backing, but in the European environment, it's not new. So take a look at this. These are the main ETFs and ETNs, or exchange traded notes in Europe. And here's a whole list. So we have quite a lot of them. We have CoinShares, 21Shares, WisdomTree, VanEck, Invesco. These guys you have all heard of in the new slew of applications. But you see here, all of their European funds have been trading for many months with actually huge sizes. So $600 million in euros, 300 million, 285 million. And you see all of these are physically backed. Let me move myself to the left here. All of these are physically backed, which means all of these already have that same beneficial, advantage of ETFs. And let's dig into this a bit deeper. So I found one of these that's pretty well known, CoinShares Physical Bitcoin. And on their official website here, this is the CoinShares Physical Bitcoin ETP, exchange traded product. And you see here, this fund is already 100% backed by physically held Bitcoin. CoinShares Physical Bitcoin ETP offers a secure and straightforward exposure to the performance of the world's largest public blockchain. So that is right away already a really good product that gives you true exposure to Bitcoin. And if you scroll down, you see its price performance tracks closely that of Bitcoin's. And here are some of its main features. So notice this physical part. For each investment in CoinShares Physical Bitcoin ETP, the very same amount is bought in real Bitcoin. And this is put into custody as a joint venture between CoinShares, Nomura, and Ledger. And that's basically it. And they also have third-party audits. So here is their proof of reserves. And if you scroll all the way down here, you see for each coin entitlement in Bitcoin, they have a physical Bitcoin held. So you see right now they have 11,800, let's say, contracts owed to their investors, to people that hold the shares of these ETPs. And they have just a little bit more Bitcoins than required, which means it's 100% backed. All of them can be actively tracked, and you can download this report every day. There's a real-time audit. So this, to me, seems very similar to the potential ETFs we'll get in the US that we're all super hyped up about. And many more of these products already exist in the European market. So you see so many of these, they're all physically backed. So why is there such a big difference then between ETPs, ETNs, and ETFs? So I dug a little bit deeper, and it's actually because of regulations. So in Europe, there's this thing called a UCITS, which stands for Undertakings for the Collective Investment in Transferable Securities, which is basically like I think, regulation among securities markets in the entire EU that guarantees certain levels of investor protection and transparency. And in order to issue a ETF or any exchange traded product, ETPs, under this regulatory framework, you have to go through certain criteria. And if we dig into it a bit deeper, so you see the regulatory variances here. In Europe, let's see, not that one, here. So this framework offers many benefits in terms of investor protection. However, it also imposes certain limitations that prevent the launch of crypto ETFs in Europe. And specifically, they do not... Can I find that rule? I cannot find that rule. But basically, this UCITS regulation in Europe prohibits the launch of ETFs that only have single products in them. So if you want to launch any exchange traded product, but it only has Bitcoins in the contract itself, you cannot call it an ETF in Europe. Instead, you have to call it a ETP, or which is the more general term, and then it kind of gets classified as ETNs, or exchange traded notes. So it exists as a debt security instead of real ownership of the underlying assets. However, it can still be fully physically backed. So this is the main difference why you don't actually hear of Bitcoin ETFs in Europe, even though there are all of these other products that are 100% physically backed by real Bitcoins in Europe. So here is a little bit more context. In the US, the SEC has been reluctant to approve a physically backed crypto ETF. So as a result, we have many of these other instruments, such as the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, which only takes money in but never comes out. And you have other ETFs that are based on futures markets or derivatives that do not have physical backing. In contrast, Europe has already found a solution to this challenge, which makes them exist as ETPs. So they are physically backed. They just don't go under the UCITS regulation as a UCITS ETF. So it's really more of a naming convention rather than something that has never been done before. And that's why I think this news today with Europe's first spot Bitcoin ETF is not as significant. Yes, it's the first time that a fund is using the ETF name in Europe and is fully trading Bitcoin specifically, right? And it's all physically backed. But there are very similar products, and I don't think this one will be super dominant and will just bring in 10 times more traffic. I think that's very unlikely. So that's the first, I think, misconception that I wanted to talk about. And also in the global market, if we look at not only Europe, but other countries as well, that's outside of the US, spot ETFs for Bitcoin and other cryptos have existed for many years already. So here are some examples here. Let's look at Canada, for example. Fidelity has already launched their own spot Bitcoin ETF in Canada in 2021. And there are many other choices that are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the TSX. You can just Google this and you can find many other options. And any Canadian can invest in this. And I took one of these as example, Evolve Bitcoin ETF. And I went on the website. And you see this provides you direct access to the price of Bitcoin through physical Bitcoin, where investors will hold actual Bitcoins in their portfolio. And this is traded on the traditional stock exchange. And here is a bit more of how this works. So how does the Bitcoin ETF work in Canada? Step 1, investors purchase ETF units on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Step 2, a dealer creates units of the ETF by paying cash. Step 3, the ETF initiates the purchase of physical Bitcoin through high-quality service providers, so they actually buy Bitcoin. And then the Bitcoin is then settled and securely stored in a cold wallet storage system. Lastly, the investor owns physical Bitcoin through the ETF. So this is very clear. It's exactly what we want eventually in all the ETFs in the US, but this already exists in Canada. The best format already exists in Canada, and many other places, other countries in the world already have these kind of spot ETF formats. So next time you hear of, oh, this blah, blah, blah country is launching Bitcoin spot ETF, if they are not the US, if they are not regulated under, the US SEC and listed on the US stock exchange, then that is not significant because globally speaking, this kind of products already exist for a very long time. So that is second point that I wanted to make. Now, let's get into what's actually exciting then. And that is with US markets, regulated US markets, Wall Street, and Wall Street largest asset managers, and US stock exchanges. So once these entities actually list Bitcoin spot ETFs, that is the major news that we are all waiting for. It's about the US market. So what is the exact timeline that we're looking at? There's a lot of misinformation, especially if you go on Twitter. Every day people are saying, oh, today there's this ETF decision coming up. Tomorrow there's a rejection. Like people are saying this is delayed till next year. What's really true? So let me give you the whole timeline. And I went on the Bloomberg Intelligence. I'm not even sure like if this is in Bloomberg portal terminal, but here is the real timelines, right? If you want to take a screenshot, here you go. And here are all of the main ticker symbols and the issuer companies. So let me break this down one by one. The next, the closest decision that we just had is the ARK Invest 21 shares Bitcoin ETF. So this is Cathie Wood's fund. So Cathie Wood, the pretty famous asset manager now. So the SEC has just delayed the decision on ARK Invest 21 shares spot ETF. And this happened August 11th, which was 4 days ago. So this is the first deadline you see here, right, on the SEC deadlines list here. And then the next one we will have is on August 15th. So this one is with the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So let me just zoom in here. Grayscale Bitcoin Trust refiling conversion of GBTC. And you see the status right now is lawsuit. So what is this one? This one is, I can't find I don't have a link here. But do I have one here? Actually, I do, yeah. Here. So the Grayscale Bitcoin ETF is set to be receiving a decision this week. It was supposed to be today, but people are saying it's going to be end of this week. It's definitely very soon, within the next few days. So what is this one? It's, for the longest time, Grayscale has operated not an ETF, but a Bitcoin trust where they take people's money and they manage their money and put it into Bitcoin. But actually, how many Bitcoins are in there and do they have proof of reserves? The auditing is very vague. And last year, in June 2022, they wanted to convert this Bitcoin trust into a Bitcoin ETF. But the SEC rejected their application, let's say. And then on the same day, Grayscale went to the courts, actually, took the SEC to court to challenge this decision. And they wanted to let the court decide whether they can take this Bitcoin trust and convert it to a Bitcoin ETF. So this is the decision we're waiting on this week. And that's why you see on this list here, this status is lawsuit instead of approval. And that's because the courts are actually reviewing this case and they are set to make a decision on this lawsuit, which is, should the SEC be obliged to convert the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust into an ETF? And they need to give that court decision this week. Now, a lot of people are saying this will get converted. I actually don't think this will happen. I think Grayscale will lose this case because Grayscale has had a pretty tainted history now. Grayscale is owned by its parent company, Digital Currency Group, or DCG. And DCG owns another company called Genesis, which nearly went bankrupt after their dealings with Luna, with FTX, with Three Arrows Capital. So they had a lot of mismanagement of their money. And it was also kind of revealed that Three Arrows Capital also owned a large part of GBTC, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, and they were leveraging it up. And that's why I think there's too much manipulation there in this product by itself. So I don't think it will be converted to an ETF. So I think they will lose this case. And that's why I think this week's news around Bitcoin, around the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust will probably not see approval to be converted to an ETF. So that's the first one to watch. Now, before we get into these future ones, let's quickly look at how long do these decision periods actually take in the US coming from the SEC. So when BlackRock filed for their Bitcoin ETF, a lot of people said, oh, like 45 days, people are going to see Bitcoin ETF. And they were super bullish. They were super euphoric. But I have been warning people on Twitter about this. So last week I tweeted this. The SEC's decision of Bitcoin spot ETF is expected by this week. However, the first deadline to respond within 45 days is not a hard deadline. A delay is commonly expected. And the longest delay we've seen is 220 days with the VanEck application back in 2021. So I didn't see many people mention this and dig into the research last week, but just today, a lot of people are digging up this kind of research again. So here it is, just 4 hours ago. The SEC has delayed set deadlines for Bitcoin spot ETF approval to early 2024, with a maximum 240-day window available for the SEC to delay crypto ETF applications. So this is not news. If you look at the historical denials of previous Bitcoin spot ETF applications, here are all of them. So you see, let me move myself to left here. Some of the top ones here, we have VanEck Bitcoin Trust, Wisdom Tree Bitcoin Trust, Cryptoin, Valkyrie, First Trust, Skybridge, and even Fidelity. And a lot of these guys filed for their ETFs back in 2021. And you see they were all rejected by the end of 2021. So most of them filed between March to May and then got rejected by the end of the year. So how many days did this take? Well, I did a little bit of a spreadsheet here. So here are the six filings that we had in 2021 that were all rejected. And you see most of these got rejected right around the 240-day mark, right? VanEck, 242, Wisdom Tree, 236, 244, 230, etc. So even though the first deadline of 45 days is kind of the first comment, it is not a hard deadline. And it seems that when the SEC is trying to make a decision, they will want to extend the deadline period as much as possible. And that's why for all six of these rejections, they came at the maximum length, which is around 240 days. So with all six of these previous rejections in the last cycle, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the SEC is going to take their sweet time, and the latest filings that we've seen this year will probably also go towards the 240-day range before they get either approved or rejected. So looking at the current filing dates then, we have ARK21 shares Bitcoin ETF filed May 15th, and 240 days from then is January 10th, 2024. And then we have BlackRock's filing and all the other major institutions filing right around July 19th to July 21st. And all of these have a final deadline between March 14th to March 19th. So these are all going by the 240-day maximum deadline. And I think, realistically speaking, next year, 2024, March 15th-ish, is the actual dates we will see Bitcoin spot ETFs probably approved are probably approved but maybe rejected. These are the real deadlines. From now until then, anything that comes in between, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt because it's either a player that's not as significant or it hasn't gone through the whole extended period yet. So this is the true deadlines if you guys just want a quick takeaway from today's video. Now, I want to give you guys some more perspectives on how I think this will play out in the next year. So on this list of all the companies that have filed for Bitcoin ETFs, there are only 3 TradFi asset managers that are actually big in traditional finance and not just crypto players. And they are BlackRock, Invesco, and Fidelity. So I refer to that from this list, which are the total managed AUM from the largest asset managers in the world. So you see BlackRock is number 1, Fidelity is number 3, and Invesco is number 7. So these guys are actually huge Wall Street asset managers. In comparison to the other guys, such as Bitwise, Vanek, WisdomTree, Valkyrie, these guys are either a bit smaller or they are crypto focused. So Bitwise, for example, is specifically working on crypto products. And that's why I think these less significant players probably won't have any special favors that they can get from the SEC to influence a potential approval of the Bitcoin ETF. Second point to note is that there is only one player in this list that have filed for a Bitcoin ETF for the first time, and that is BlackRock. So notice how all of these issuers here, they have refilings in their ticker names. Only BlackRock doesn't have one. So this is BlackRock's first time filing for a Bitcoin ETF. And also, something to note is that BlackRock by far has the best approval rate for an ETF filing in the US. So they have 575 approvals and only 1 rejection. These 2 points combined is the reason why all of these players quickly refiled their own Bitcoin spot ETFs right after BlackRock filed, because they're all thinking that BlackRock is the one that can actually bring this to life and can get the actual approval as a first precedent from the US and from the SEC. So for these reasons, I think the first one to get Bitcoin spot ETF approved is going to be BlackRock. And I think their approval dates is probably going to be March next year. So then looking at the couple other outliers that we have before then, so ARK21 shares with their refiling, they have the SEC deadline on January 10th, 2024. But I think these guys will also get rejected again in January because I don't think they will get theirs approved before BlackRock does. Very simple. Same thing for Grayscale. Another reason why I think Grayscale will lose this lawsuit. So that's kind of all the takeaway I wanted to give. And last bit of dates in case you guys are interested. So while the final deadlines are in March of 2024, there are 3 more deadlines from now until then. So how these delays usually happen is that every 45 to 60 days or so, the SEC can come out to make a comment about each of the Bitcoin spot ETF filings and say, okay, we're going to approve, reject, or delay until the final deadline. So these are the potential dates. We're looking at September 1st and 2nd, October 16th and 17th, and then January 14th and 15th. However, again, looking at the previous number of days delays, which all extended to 240 days, I don't think we will get any positive or negative responses in the middle periods. I think we will only get them once the final deadlines approach. And these deadlines also match up nicely with the next Bitcoin halving, which is happening in April next year. And usually that ties into the next Bitcoin cycle as well. So I think all of these events probably will line up. And before that happens, the markets will tend to chop a bit more. And maybe we could have another leg down where some of these current lawsuits around Binance, around Coinbase, can get settled, and some of the crypto native players might get squeezed out in order for BlackRock and for Wall Street to truly take advantage and control of the crypto industry before they can officially launch their Bitcoin ETFs. So I think that's much more likely for us to have more chop and more leg down before this all finally get approved. So that is my outlook right now. Hopefully this has been helpful. Please pay attention to a lot of the misinformation going on for the next, how long is that? 7 months from now. There's going to be more and more Bitcoin ETF speculation. Every other day, people are going to say spot ETF approved, rejected, never going to happen, or happening tomorrow. But these are the real deadlines. Okay. Lastly, I wanted to look at Bitcoin price really quick. So coming off of this European Bitcoin spot ETF news, Bitcoin really hasn't moved much in terms of price. So we have had these charts drawn on Bitcoin for 3 weeks now, I think. So Bitcoin on a weekly time frame, I think it's really looking quite shaky right now. So a lot of positive news continue to come out, especially with this like Bitcoin spot ETF in Europe today. Bitcoin didn't move at all. And even with all these ETF speculation, what's more interesting though is that this bearish divergence on the RSI is still continuing to play out. So you see price has made higher high, RSI has made lower high. So this usually leads to a price reversal. We have covered this for 3 weeks now. It's getting kind of boring, but it's still the number one thing I'm watching, as well as this potential double bottom here, still waiting to play out. So next move I would really like to see is for Bitcoin to revisit 25K and to see the reaction here if we get a bounce or not. And for the last 3 weeks or so, if you look at these last 3 weekly candles, it has been nothing but flat. So Bitcoin has not made any moves in the past 3 weeks. And that's why I just sound like a broken bell at this point. But essentially, Bitcoin is pushing up against all the key supports. So we have the diagonal trend line, very clear blue trend line here. And we have the 21 weekly EMA, which usually is the long-term bull market support. So that sits at 28,000 exactly. So between 28,000 and 29,000, there is kind of an immediate buy zone here. So if I draw a little box here, right here. Why is this blue? Why is this not blue? Here. So there is kind of an immediate buy zone that Bitcoin price is sitting exactly on top of. Honestly, it's really hard to tell what the next immediate move will be. We just know that a short-term move is coming. We know that Bitcoin is squeezing up against the significant support. And we know 32K is a very significant resistance because we have also covered this for a very long time. This significant resistance dates all the way back to the bull market support levels back in 2021 and back in the beginning of 2021. So 32K, very significant resistance. 28K, immediate support is just holding up Bitcoin. So all in all, I think this is kind of a no trade zone. Personally, if I really have to take a bet, I would say it's towards the downside because with all the positive news, what else can really happen, right? That is actually of significant, real catalyst. Well, unless we get real Bitcoin spot ETF approval from the SEC in the US right now instead of next year, I don't think any speculative news will drive the price up much. On the other hand, there's a lot of potential negative news that could come out before next year's Bitcoin halving and the ETF approval. So we have Coinbase, we have Binance, both still getting sued by the SEC. We have Binance really losing market share and having their public FUD with Tether USDT. So a lot of industry-wide events that probably will happen in the next 6 months or so. And this is all coming from pressure from the US government, from US banking system cutting off ties with crypto native players, with exchanges, and how BlackRock wants to control this industry. So overall, I think in the next 6 months or so, I really doubt that we're going to continue to have this kind of just long-term uptrend leading into the Bitcoin ETF approval and Bitcoin halving event. I think more likely we're going to have more chop and probably another down leg here. So if that happens, again, I've covered this on every weekly stream now. My buy range is going to be in between here, between 20K and 25K. So 20K, I think, is truly the bottom line for me for Bitcoin because of this huge wick we had when Binance had the biggest FUD. But 25K, I think it's too close of a higher low now that I don't think it's just going to bounce right from there. So I think chances are we're going to get a wick between 20 and 25. Yeah, and that's it. So quick shout out. So if you guys want to follow my trades, I'm actually working on an exchange partnership right now with Fairdesk. I'm going to start doing more copy trading. So if you guys want to follow my trades and follow my Bitcoin positions, Ethereum positions, and day-to-day kind of copy trades in these, let's say, short-term trend moves. So if this short-term trend breaks down, my next buying targets around 20 to 25K. If you guys want to copy that, I'll have that up on Fairdesk quite soon. So you can check it out with the link in my, I think, description on YouTube. And also you can go on virtualweekend.com. You'll also find links there. If you sign up with my link, you also get a really big deposit bonus. I think it's up to 100K depending on how much you trade and how much you deposit. So we're going to cover more about how to do copy trading as well on the channel with a dedicated video quite soon. And yeah, that's Bitcoin price. I think right now, probably a no trade zone, but it's looking quite shaky. The fact that we're just not getting Bitcoin upwards momentum at all, even though with so many positive news.